All right, well, if we're live and people out there, we'll just give it a couple minutes while people trickle in. I see that the participant count is kind of slowly going up here, so welcome. This is the session on addressing systemic sheltering emergencies through sustainable building practices in the post-COVID world. So we're packing a lot in here in this 15-minute session. All right, well, it looks like since we are kind of running on a tight schedule, I guess I'll just kick this off and get started. So this session is running from now until noon, so welcome. And if you're just joining us, so this is the session on addressing systemic sheltering emergencies through sustainable building practices in the post-COVID world. So we're going to be covering a few topics around the intersection of sustainability, emergency shelter, and sort of the human side of the design aspects of building emergency shelter in a sustainable way, kind of given this last year of lessons learned and sort of learning about projects out there in the world that are coming to coming to market that are kind of reinventing how emergency shelter is being built. So with that, the kind of structure here of how we're going to kind of go through this next 50 minutes is the next 10 minutes. I'm just going to give a quick kind of landscape overview and some introductions of our speakers. And then we'll hear from each of the four panelists with just a little bit of more detail around the projects that they're working on and hearing kind of the background and experience that they have in the space of emergency shelter and sustainable human-centered design. And then we'll be going into a Q&A session for the last 20 or 15 minutes, depending on how much time we have. So if you do have questions, please kind of start, I guess, thinking about them for this last 15 minutes. I do have quite a list of questions that I can ask, but if, I do want to make this a sort of interactive Q&A session at the end. So I'll be happy to kind of bring or highlight people's questions if you want to put it in the chat box towards the end. So with that, welcome. This is a panel of industry leading professionals from the architecture community, the social services providers, capital and philanthropic providers, and architects, designers, developers, and general contractors. So we have a lot of different roles and perspectives here on looking at how is emergency shelter sort of evolving in this post-pandemic world. And obviously, since this is a sustainable green building lens with this panel, we're going to be kind of looking at it through that lens in some aspects. But we kind of really want to dig into sort of what is the status right now of modern prefab design and construction. What processes are being implemented right now that are sort of reinventing how this housing typology is being deployed, and really kind of dive into some key case studies of emergency shelter that have been built around the Bay Area, Los Angeles, and elsewhere in California that are kind of, I'd say at the kind of pioneering edge of this new typology world of emergency shelter, interim housing for our most vulnerable populations. So with that, kind of to introduce myself, I'm Charly Ligety. I'm the managing director of the Housing Innovation Collaborative, also known as HICO. And I'm sure some of you out there have probably seen us around or have gotten our newsletters around one of the showcases that we've been running, which is Rapid Shelter Showcase. So, as an organization, as a nonprofit R&D platform, we are really creating kind of a showcase or platform for sharing best practices around this very topic of rapid shelter, emergency shelter, and creating sort of a World's Fair exhibition on our website at housinginnovation.co that focuses on how these different designers, developers, and cities are deploying rapid shelter around the world. And we recently did some research with HUD and FEMA. So, it's definitely a quickly emerging field that has been accelerated over the past year. And I'm glad to be joined by, in no particular order, but this is the order that we'll also be hearing from them each as their own presentations. But we have Joe Stockwell. He serves as a board member, board chair since 2014 of the nonprofit based in the Bay Area called Life Moves. He's also a principal with Odyssey Management Capital, specializing in telecom and media. Has worked in various Silicon Valley firms throughout his career. And he really comes at this from a philanthropical lens of kind of looking at how these projects are built, and as a board member, sort of seeing through the implementation, sort of how other, I guess, philanthropic aspects of this can be sort of scaled up. We have Amber Sheikh, who comes from Los Angeles. She is the Chief Impact Officer and owner at Sheikh Impact. She works on raising the capacity of nonprofit organizations serving LA communities, focusing on fundraising, external relations, organizational development. And as a certified fundraising executive, she also really helps nonprofits scale their operations, connect with the philanthropic or capital providers out there, and sort of helps see through the mission of a lot of these nonprofit initiatives working in this space. She's also very active in the homelessness front here in Los Angeles, serving on several committees and boards, including the Harbor Area Planning Commission with Mayor Eric Garcetti, and then also serving on the mayor's Harbor Area Homelessness Organizing Committee. So she'll be bringing some the human design approach, or the human perspective approach to this rapidly evolving segment. We have Jared Levy from Connect Homes. He's the co-founder of Connect Homes. It's a prefab modern housing provider based here in Los Angeles. They build their housing in a factory just not too far out of Los Angeles in the Inland Empire. And they have launched a new line of emergency shelters, Connect Shelters, which have really been focusing on this rapidly deployment housing options segment of the market over the past year. And so he'll be talking to us about how their work has been now deployed in the interim homelessness segment of the market over the past few months on an innovative project up in the Bay Area. So they have a village that just opened, I guess a couple weeks ago, that is using a typology to address homelessness that has never been sort of seen before in California. I think it's sort of an interesting case study of how, these companies that have been building, $1 million homes have really pivoted to how to democratize a lot of that high-end design to the sort of essential workforce and most vulnerable populations. And so I think that's going to be interesting to hear him speak. And then we have Nate Garnero, who is a co-founder of Boo House, which is a Malibu-based prefab company. He also is a general contractor and works on various residential projects throughout the state. And through Boo House and his designs on shipping container retrofits, he's sort of bringing a perspective of, how communities are recovering from not a homelessness crisis, but natural disasters, in addition to other kind of, I guess, case studies or use cases of this emergency shelter is, after Woolsey Fire in Malibu and other communities around California, Boo House has been providing some solutions for rapidly deploying shelter. And given that they are recycling shipping containers and turning those into these modern homes, sort of how that is also a sustainable way to be deploying housing in California. So with that, I think, we're right on the dot at 11:20. So I'll start with the presentation segment of this and hand it over to Joe, who can, I guess, share his screen, and we'll take it from there. And then we'll come back in about 20 minutes as we walk through each one of these presentations to do some Q&A. So Joe, I see your screen, so go ahead.
Thank you, Charlie. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today. I'm, as Charlie said, the board chair at Life Moves. Just a quick, I'm going to be mostly focusing on our new project in Mountain View. But just a quick note about Life Moves. We're the largest provider of supportive services to folks experiencing homelessness in Silicon Valley. And we're really specialized in interim programs. So people stay with us 90 to 120 days, lots of families and individuals. So we've been around 40 years. Currently, I have 26 sites that we operate, uh, including some safe parking and newer, unusual sites. About 1,500 people in our care today, and 380 employees and growing. So we've had very successful programs, but I want to get to the Mountain View site. So here's I don't need to speak to this group probably about the problem, but our focus, all around California has been on building permanent housing, which of course we support. We need a lot more permanent housing. But essentially in Silicon Valley, virtually no new shelter capacity has been built in the last decade. And our population of people experiencing homelessness has only grown. And the Bay Area probably has roughly 35,000 people experiencing homelessness, and Silicon Valley has 12 or so of that. And those are PIT numbers from 2019, so probably growing. So as COVID hit, our focus was, yes, we haven't built a site in a long time, over a decade, but we need to get out there and take action, and we need to do something different. So we saw, safe parking was an option, but safe parking, what we weren't able to deliver our services as effectively as we'd like with safe parking. We needed something that resembled more our shelters, but of course we had to empty our congregate shelters. So we needed something non-congregate. That's when I met Jared, and Gordon at Connect Homes, and we went to work. So this is our site in Mountain View. I got a couple pictures on the next couple slides, but in a nutshell, it's on 1 acre. We bought the land. It was privately held land. This is a home keyback site, by the way. 100 doors, 124 beds. There's both families and individuals on the site. I'll walk through the site in a minute. But importantly, crucially, from our perspective, 30% of the square footage of the site is dedicated to supportive service delivery. The cost for this site, all in with land, was about $160,000 a door. Again, crucially, we were able to stand this up in 6 months from starting construction. And we just opened it 2 weeks ago. We've got our first clients in today. So what's important about this, because we're an interim provider, those 124 beds will serve roughly 350 people per year. So over 5 years at this site alone, we're approaching 2,000 people that we'll serve, to give you a sense of the scale. And we're able to operate it very efficiently, cost effectively, at under $50 a night. So here's just some pictures of the site. This was a car repair shop with a dilapidated house on it on the left side, and you can see some of our picture of on the right, less than 6 months later. A couple pictures of our site. Jared has some pictures as well, but our Connect units are up on the upper right. These are containers on the left, the food service center, and I'll speak to these bathrooms here that are also container-based in a second. So here's a little more on the layout of this particular site. So in the back, the city, who was our partner in this project as a home key project, really wanted to see both families and individuals. We've never operated a site in our 40 years of families and individuals on the same location. So we had to give a lot of thought to how to do that, how to accomplish that, and how to actually densify the site. Which was really challenging. But we ended up with our units, our singles units in the back, or individual units. And so you can see that we have 80 singles units and also 8 units for couples in those units in the back. Those units are 80 square foot each, and do not have their own bathrooms. So the bathrooms for the singles and individuals are in 3 containers. You can see over on the right hand side, and we did that for a couple reasons. Yes, there was some cost savings by consolidating your plumbing, but that's not the key driver from our perspective. It really was a programming decision that for the folks we'd expect to serve at this site, we felt it was helpful to sort of get people out of their units. They can lock their doors, they have privacy, but get them out, come to the bathroom, engage in services as much as possible, and really try to develop a feel for a community with this. So that's where we ended up on this site. The family units are on the front of the lot. Those do have ensuite bathrooms. So obviously you don't want the children to go into the other bathrooms. And we have a divider with access control separating the family side from the single side. But importantly, in the middle of the site, you see it's all the services. So as I said, 30% of the square footage, dining area. We've got this incredible community room that was built by Connect Homes. And then a bunch of case management offices, an on-site nurse, and also storage for our clients, as well as playground. So that's kind of the site layout. The site just opened a couple weeks ago. We got our first clients coming in, and we're really excited to have this site. It's a showcase site, and we're doing a lot of touring of public officials right now, and we've made a call to action to do 10 more sites like this between us and our peer agencies in the Bay.
Amazing. Well, hey, Joe, I hate to cut you off, but I do want to stay on schedule. So it sounds like people can learn more about this by going to that website, which we should share in the chat, so people can obviously dive into this more than a quick overview. But hey, Joe, thank you so much for your overview. Okay, so moving to the next speaker. Sorry, we're just keeping this on schedule here, so I might have to cut you off. But Amber, if you want to take it away.
I'm setting a timer. Hi, everyone.
And I'll chat to you directly.
Perfect. That's perfect. Hi, everyone. I'm Amber Sheikh, and but this is a great piggyback actually off of Joe's presentation, because that is such an amazing project and is obviously so intentionally planned and executed. And I'm sure the implementation will be just as beautiful. So that's very exciting for me to see. So I come to this work from a community advocate perspective, as well as a professional perspective. I started working in permanent supportive housing about 15 years ago when we had some of our first PSH done in Los Angeles and helped do capital campaigns to build that, but have continued in various forms of that, as well as become a very active community advocate, quote unquote, for fun on the side of work, to really make sure that this work is being done well in our communities and being done with an eye to success, actually. And where I say I bring the human voice into this process is all of us that are doing the design, the building, and all of that, we are really stuck in the day-to-day. And I cannot tell you how much the voices of those who are going to benefit from this work make us better at what we do technically, but it also ensures the program's success in other ways. So when you have that and you can ground in that, and sometimes it takes having a consultant like me or community groups like I run to do that, it brings intentionality to all aspects of the work. And if you think about all the folks that are here, when it comes to design and all, there's an intentionality kind of baked in everything we do. And so it's ensuring that carries out. So one thing I wanted to talk about is the importance of actually telling the story of the work. And Joe started to do that pretty well in his presentation, honestly, about how these projects fit into a long range plan for solving homelessness. This is a piece in a larger concept. And I think that also really helps when you are, I'm going to use the word selling it just because it's easier to say, to the community, to your investors, and to philanthropic investors. And I'll get a little bit into philanthropic investors later in my presentation, which is like a minute from now. But this is how we make sure that everyone knows it's a community education process as well, how important these projects are to get people off the street, number one, to stabilize them, number two, and number three, to get them housing ready, actually. And so when we can tell that story as well, it's incredibly powerful because there are a lot of folks out there. I really do believe that everyone wants what's best for their community, and they just don't always know how to go about that. And I start most of my community forums out that way to kind of say, I expect we're all adults here, most of them at least, and we all want what's best for our community. And if we learn something today that helps us either change our mind or open our minds, I want you to be open to that. Because if you're really open to what's best for your community, you have to be open to all of it. So this is where I say, as you are going out there with your amazing, incredible projects, tell the story. Tell the stories of the folks that are going to be inside. Tell the story of the lives it's going to change. And that's going to help you also gain the support you need to do the work well. Because even though my background's in fundraising, and when we started to build permanent supportive housing in Los Angeles, 15, 20 years ago, this was done with private philanthropy. So we had a lot of agility in our funding to do exactly what we think was best for the population. And right now, just given the scope of how we're building in this state, as well as the way financial modeling is going with where you're getting money from, you are sometimes being limited. There's more restrictive funding than perhaps would be ideal in the situation. So I cannot stress enough the importance of filling in gaps with private philanthropy to ensure that your projects actually do what needs to get done to do them well. Because that's not just a responsibility for you and the folks that you're going to house. It's actually, I'm going to say, a responsibility for the system. Because we are all doing this, we're all building these, and we're all trying to do this together in hopes that we can prove that these are successful. And these projects will not be successful unless you put in other services, you have the right wraparound services, you have really intentional design for the actual population you're serving, and you have some agility and some flexibility to give some of the residents other things that your voucher process or your fee-for-service process or something else may not give you. So this is such an interesting time as a fundraiser. I've never been approached by so many nonprofit housing developers because they have now realized at the scale and the scope that we are building right now, those small gaps that used to be a place that you'd kind of fill with friends and some checks here and there are becoming multi-$100,000 gaps and all these other things. And those small places are not like filling them anymore. So that's my message for you today. Bring the human message and make sure that you are doing all the things you need to make sure that you have a great diverse financial modeling so that you can do the work well.
Amazing. Thank you, Amber. And right on the dot, which is perfect. And we're now moving to Jared of Connect Homes. So Jared, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Charlie. Let me share my screen. I'll try and keep it under 5. So I'm Jared, co-founder of Connect Homes, and our company has really turned the classic single family house into a modern, smart, energy efficient product. We've developed a standard product library. We've made the process of building a new home a lot like buying a new car. One of the main problems we started out as a company to tackle was the aging US housing stock. In areas like LA and the Bay Area, close to 70% of all the homes were built pre-1970. And most of them were actually built in the late 1940s as part of post-war housing tracts. And so these homes are completely energy efficient. There's no insulation, there's single pane glazing, they have outdated heating and cooling systems. And when you look at residential energy usage accounting for 20% of the global energy demand, this is a really big problem. So we developed a housing platform to really have a cost-effective solution to replacing these old homes. We have a 100,000 square foot factory out in San Bernardino. We created an assembly line process to build them quickly. At our current pace, we have a standard size 2,000 square foot home coming off our assembly line every 6 days, and we can actually go a lot faster. And so, when COVID hit, we really found ourselves wanting to take our expertise and know-how, which is building housing quickly on an assembly line, and figure out if we could offer a real solution in this crisis. As we all know, homelessness had already reached crisis levels, especially in Los Angeles pre-pandemic. But what we saw was the pandemic was really amplifying the problem. Not only were people being forced to live on the street, and more people were being forced to live on the street, but living in close quarters on the street became a place where the virus could spread, and congregate shelters really offered the potential to becoming super spreader locations. And so with this crisis, the same old thinking, this is what Joe was hitting at, the same old thinking of the only solution to get people off the street is to build enough permanent supportive housing for them is really a non-starter when you have a crisis like this. And so building supportive housing, it's amazing. It's 100% necessary. We should build as much as we can, but it can take close to 5 years to entitle and build. It can cost up to $750,000 per bed, and we can't wait. So, we developed Connect Shelter as a solution, and it's really to be this interim supportive housing solution. I think it's a term that Joe's been coming up with as well. But the idea is that it can be rapidly deployed, it can be set up on an interim basis, and it can provide immediate housing for the homeless for the short to medium term while we wait for more permanent supportive housing and long-term housing to be built. Sorry, one more thing, it costs a fraction of the cost, per bed, just for the structure itself is $20,000 per bed. And it can be built in a fraction of the time of permanent supportive housing. And so, let me just get rid of this. Our shelters are built on the same housing platform as our homes. So we think good design is just as important for a homeowner in Culver City as it is for someone who has no home. We design our shelters with COVID in mind. Each room is private with the optionality to have private bathrooms as well. They have large windows for lots of natural light and also airflow. Each room has its own individualized heating and cooling system and its own individualized filtered air. We took into account the turnover as well. And so all the services are easy to clean and easy to sterilize. And, I think what's really important for us is that these aren't hard shell tents. These aren't sheds. These are homes, and they're homes for the homeless. We were really excited when we were approached by Joe to help with this project he was really imagining and working out in Mountain View. And it really was a new typology for housing. It was this idea of creating interim supportive housing that could fill this gap that we needed to fill. It was really amazing for us to see Joe's kind of out of the box thinking and also his sense of urgency to get this done. I think a lot of times for these projects, that sense of urgency seems to be missing, and Joe has that in spades. And so we signed a contract in October to supply 22 shelters, totaling 88 beds. And we made our first delivery 2 months later, actually slightly less than 2 months later in December. So it really to do, and this is the Life Moves Mountain View project that Joe was talking about. We did some of the shelters, it really was a partnership and a collaboration across all the different stakeholders. It's from Life Moves, thinking outside the box and wanting to quickly get housing in place in a pace, kind of never seen before when it comes to permanent supportive housing. It was the city of Mountain View getting on board with the idea and also approving and being part of the process of approving a new form of housing. It took architects, contractors, other manufacturers, everyone kind of really felt this urgency to bring this project online as quickly as we could, and we were really kind of gratified to be part of it.
All right, amazing, Jared. I just want to give you 10 seconds to wrap up since we have to move on to the next speaker. But
Sure.
Thank you so much for all the detail.
Yeah, no problem. So we have a lot of different models of shelter models. We offer support services. We have a lot of different configurations that can work on different sites. And for anyone from the city of Los Angeles listening, we really want to do this here in our own backyard. So that's it. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Call to action there. Bring it home in Los Angeles. Okay, perfect. So we're going from now Connect Homes based out of downtown Los Angeles to the far western fringes of the LA region, Malibu. So Nate, you want to take it away with Boo House? Nate, are you there? Let me see here if he might be on mute. I don't see Nate now on the list. Who lets people in to this call? Can someone let Nate back in?
Hi, Charlie. I remember letting Nate in. I'm just going to look over it.
I guess while we're waiting for Nate, I can kind of jump in here with some sort of questions off the bat. So just to recap, Jared and Joe on this Mountain View project. So timeline was about 2 to 3 months, and you mentioned the cost per door with the land was $160,000 per unit. Is that right? Just kind of some numbers, quick takeaways for people to remember.
Yeah. And then, I mean, the big takeaway there, Charlie, is the costs of the module are not the biggest costs. It's site development.
Right.
And so you got to really think about that. And we have a bunch of ideas and strategies from going super light touch to a more permanent installation, which is what we did.
Great. Nate, are you there? I guess, and one other follow-up question I had since we have, I guess, a second while Nate joins us again. Amber, for diverse sources of financing, what kind of sources are you seeing nonprofits putting together here to get more shelters built?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously there's a lot of depending on where you're doing it. So now I'm working with organizations both in Northern and Southern California around, state and local, city and county tax incentives, incentive programs, kind of that whole package that everyone puts together. Those get really complex, obviously. And we're finding more and more that some private institutional funders, so who we think of as foundation and corporate funders, as well as individual funders, especially some of our larger philanthropic givers in our main area, our largest cities in the state especially, are really looking at how they can also invest in this philanthropically. And so there's a market out there absolutely for that. And of course, like any grant or philanthropic fund, it doesn't get paid back. It's seen as a doubling down on municipal funds essentially, and making sure that these projects actually succeed. So, I mean, that's really what it is. It's foundation, corporate, and individual giving, kind of like we see just in the regular fundraising world, but larger amounts and definitely more focused giving as well, wanting to take certain pieces of these projects.
Yeah, and it seems like, the traditional grants that have gone out there over the past 30 years are really slivers of a permanent supportive housing project or a project that is, what you kind of envision the regular typology being of a affordable housing development, multi-story, higher density project in town. So I guess, how are philanthropic or foundations looking at this space of the interim shelter, sort of the argument that Joe and Jared are saying, where, yes, we support permanent housing solutions, but we need something now.
But yes, there needs to be something right now. Well, I think honestly, a lot of the foundations, I'll speak to those larger foundations in California, are seeing that because they have been supporting PSH traditionally, and they're seeing the lag on it. And they're seeing how by leveraging municipal funding for PSH, this is actually going a ton slower than it used to. and the red tape there's a lot more. And it's like a race to the bottom in a way for how you get it done, rather than get it done well and get it done the way that, you can tell the story of how this particular population needs these services and blah, blah, blah. It's more just a race to who's cheaper. And that's not also what they're in the business of. So they, I think, really see it more than ever, how transitional housing is not just a place to keep folks and stabilize them, but also a place to prep folks for that PSH that they've already invested in. So once that opens up, their projects are going to be that much more successful. The ones that I'm saying their boards have already invested in. So I think that argument, I'm now making it to funders, foundation funders, but also individual funders who are saying, look, I have philanthropic money, I have funds. Yes, there are some obviously examples of more innovative PSH going on, and that's great. And sure, that's faster, but we're not seeing anything for another 2 years, regardless of how fast it is. And in the meantime, this is out of control. And I don't, like, I'm not going to stand for this. And I actually have funding to help with that. So tell me what to do with my funding in order to stop the bleed, basically. While we
it's kind of adopting, I guess, like a yes and approach to this. It's not, you're not really choosing this or that.
And that's exactly it. And I mean, I use that in my approach philanthropically, but I also really, I almost want to put the pressure on us as a state that we cannot also allow interim housing to look like it's solving the issue fully either, because that's essentially what happened in New York. It's like shelters everywhere, shelter system roulette is basically what we do. And then because no one is on the street anymore, there really just is not the same attention to build, like there's no incentive to build housing. So we don't want that either, which I think is why when we go out there and we have our pitches with funders of all types, it's an educational opportunity to show how this is a really, really important piece of a pipeline. It is not the answer.
Yep.
It's all part of the answer though, because if we just wait for PSH, which technically is the answer, we'll be so far behind on this. I mean, what we see now in our country, I guess you could say, around homelessness is deferred maintenance. Horribly deferred maintenance on so many things around housing and system inequities and all this other stuff. You can tell I like talking about this. Anyway, but it is essentially, we're behind to begin with.
Yeah.
So we need projects like these to catch up.
And just to jump in, Amber,
Joe.
The longer people are on the streets, we're obviously
Harder it is.
on the streets. Look at the encampments that are everywhere now, right? Yeah. And the longer people are on the streets, the more difficult it is to recover that individual. The longer it takes, the more resources it takes. It's and Joe,
good example, like you can tell that story. You can explain why. I mean, if you put someone in the shoes of someone who, I always think about a lot of the women that I work with out there. It's like week one, what happens to a woman out there? You can describe it. Then why somebody would want to numb themselves, why they would start using who've never used before. And then what happens with that? What happens 6 months later, a year later, 3 years into it? How do you dig yourself out of that? And I think that's where having some kind of housing where people can stabilize and begin to work on the things they need to. I mean, it's how we're going to solve it right now.
Well, and I'm kind of ask you this question around how cities are sort of, I guess, responding and get their heads around these smaller spaces at a lower cost point, at a more accessible cost point. What are some of, like, I guess, the misperceptions around, is this a humane way to provide housing? Like, how are you responding to those critics that say, like, putting someone in a really small space isn't the solution? Like, how do you hear that narrative out there?
I hear it a ton. And I'm, advocating on there. So the most recent example I've been using is, so we have a pallet shelter being built near us. So, for those that it's like, tiny homes. And they've been done pretty sustainably and they've gone on pretty quick. So a lot of folks are like, oh my God, no, why they wouldn't want to live in these, And so I did what I try to do is when people bring up questions, I go ask people that are homeless. Like, I'm not going to speak for them. So when I was out last Saturday showing photos, because I did the tour of the pallet shelter / tiny homes, and I was showing folks who are now in line the photos, and they're like, oh my gosh, Amber, show us what they look like. And I'm going through my phone, I'm showing them the photos, and they're like, oh my God, that has air conditioning. And I was like, I know, I don't even have air conditioning. And so, you know, their reactions were enough for me. Like, that is air conditioning, that is a door. And wait, they're not actually they were impressed, for example, that they didn't share walls, that they had a little space between them, and there was some green space and some planters. And these are folks that have been out there for years. Like, I'm surprised at the reaction. I mean, maybe I'm cynical, but I was like, wait, really? Like, you're really excited about this, you know? And they're like, yeah. Like, I think the top, I mean, air conditioning was up there, let's be honest, especially because it's summer is about to hit. But I gather the stories, I tell those stories. Like, in a way, I don't need to come up with an argument. And we also need a diverse set of solutions. So it's like, tiny homes aren't going to work for everyone. Safe parking's not going to work for everyone. Safe camping's not going to work for everyone. Congregate facilities aren't going to work for everyone, because they're all a bunch of humans that we're talking about. But if we give enough choice, maybe we'll get everyone. And we're actually going out, we're doing a street-based needs assessment tomorrow in our 4 largest encampments down in my area. We're literally like listing out all the different kinds of temporary housing we have either available or in the pipeline. And we're asking folks either why they haven't accepted it yet, or kind of what the pros and cons are to them. And of course, we're actually, you know, compensating them for their time, but we're actually trying to gather this data, because as advocates, we kind of need to know what we should be advocating for.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I wanted to bring Jared into on this conversation around design aspects, and also, I guess, in addition to that, this smaller space, more accessible design, also around like this sort of issue of how do you make green design more accessible and equitable to more people? Like, how are you telling the story also around how green design isn't a premium in cost, or is actually can be accessible and part of this housing crisis? Because it sort of seems like when you're addressing the housing crisis, it's housing first, green design kind of comes as an afterthought. But what's your response?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think for, you know, by its very nature, building in a factory in a controlled environment is more sustainable than building on site for a lot of reasons. You know, there's less waste generated. Since everything becomes standardized in the factory, everything can be pre-cut, everything can be reused, because each home, each shelter uses the same products over and over again. So whatever's not used for one gets used for another. So, you know, just for building one house on a job site conventionally, that will generate 8,000 pounds of waste. That's just for one house. So, you know, I think there's inherent qualities in factory building that are way more sustainable and way more green. And, you know, we focus on that. I think, you know, when it comes to specific materials, whether they're recycled or whether they were harvested sustainably, it's always a balance between cost and benefit. And so if we had everything that we could conceivably have in a house be as green and eco-friendly as possible, the cost would go up. So we're always striking that right balance, choosing like the things that will have the biggest impact and choosing the things that won't kind of move the needle, where all of a sudden what should be an affordable solution no longer is affordable.
Yeah, that's great. What's the lowest hanging fruit that you see as especially in like this emergency shelter space of being kind of like easier, more accessible to sort of incorporate into design around you know, connect shelters or just this typology in general?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the things that we do is we have ductless heat pump heating and cooling systems, and we do that by choice. We also do that, you know, one of the kind of benefits of that is that it is kind of more green and more energy efficient to use heating than that, rather than kind of pushing air through ducts. It also lends itself to, you know, providing shelter and housing for the homeless in this kind of time of a pandemic where people aren't exchanging air and, you know, breathing other people's air. So, you know, that system alone had a lot of benefits to it, on the green front, on the sustainability front, and even on the use front.
Interesting. I guess, I don't know if Nate will close us out with his presentation. Nate, are you there? All right. Well, I guess Nate had some technical difficulties, and maybe his computer crashed. We're living in a Zoom world right now, so who knows? All these all these software bugs can creep up on you. I mean, I guess the questions from the audience, let me see here if I can incorporate some questions here around. So I guess there's a question about the multi-story solution of higher density on sites. Jared, I mean, I guess you ended it with a rendering of like a 2-story concept. So for cities that have locations that sort of need to take advantage of land where you're offering sort of a solution, how do you make the most of land with the 2-story solution? How much does that sort of, I guess, increase cost or complexity of the project to go a higher density?
Yeah, I think density definitely becomes an issue in all these, especially because there's usually limitations on the size of the sites and the lots that you could do this. One thing when you're dealing with like a sort of shed type solution where each one has to be individual and you have to have space between them for fireproofing and fire access, you actually end up with less density than you can with just kind of our shelters, kind of grouping them all together. But yeah, we're always kind of designing per what the operators need and what the agencies need, and density became a thing. And so we developed a 2-story solution where we could get more density on lots where it's appropriate, but it's again, like the same product, the same solution. It's just now, we've designed it so it can be a 2-story solution.
And has there been I guess, have you built a project yet with a 2-story solution, or is that still in, I guess, state level review inspection period still?
Yeah, no, it's already been sort of approved at the state level. We do 2-story homes all the time, so we know how to do 2 stories. It just was translating the shelter into that 2-story solution. But yeah, the 2-story solutions are ready to go, and we're in talks with a few different kind of local governments and counties to implement them.
Great, and I see that we only have about 2 minutes left, so I want to just touch again on sort of this human-centered design aspect and approach. Amber, I mean, what's some, I guess, key takeaways, either how a site is laid out or how a program is developed that sort of helps serve the mission of these transitional shelter communities, which is, getting people stabilized and on a track to permanent housing? What do you see as sort of, I don't know, some successful key takeaways on how to lay out a program or a site?
I mean, a lot of the better programs I see down here actually have resident councils from the get-go. And that gets folks involved with obviously wanting to move in when it's time, folks that are marked to move in, and have some say in it along the way as well. So there's something to be said for giving people a voice, but then also translating that to all other stakeholders, not just about who's in there, even though of course it's a lot about who's in there, but it's about the community too. It has to be integrated in the community to work.
Great. And Joe, we didn't cover much about how other philanthropic partners can get involved, but how does philanthropy plug into a project or a program? Sort of what are some of the pathways for people to get involved?
Yeah, there's an urgent need. There's a crisis. We got to act. So everybody's just got to jump in. The Home Keep program, which is going to be in this summer's budget, is a great opportunity to get the financing to anchor these sites. And then, as Amber described, getting private money to, leverage that. We got to do more of these. We're here to help. So anybody can come to Life Moves. We'll help you sort through it. But it's there.
Yeah, the California state needs a Home Key GoFundMe page of all the different projects listed out, so people can pick their favorite one and contribute to.
Yeah,
contribute to it. All right. Well, I see that we have to close out. So since there's another panel or programming after this. So just with that, I just wanted to thank Joe, Amber, Jared, and Nate, who was here earlier, but due to technical difficulties, couldn't make it. You can check out Boo House online to kind of learn more about that shipping container solution. But just want to thank everyone's comments, contributions, and keep on fighting the good fight and hacking away at this homelessness and housing crisis that we're facing here. And best of luck with everyone's efforts.
Great. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone.